Oh, it's a TLD, but only some registrars support it.
Mm.
And they're more expensive than all other TLDs.
Not surprising. So the AI craze is really just an excuse to sell more URLs, right?
Yeah. Among other things.
Can anybody explain why I still see Amazon ads for things that I bought yesterday, today?
Yeah, because that's how data aggregation works.
Well, it's not very intelligent, is it?
It's brilliant in retrospect, like most of us.
Well, they can determine that if you bought it, you are highly likely to buy one of these. It just happened yesterday instead of tomorrow, which is what they were hoping for.
Does anybody have a idea of what registrar does accept .ai?
GoDaddy does.
Oh, gross.
Wow, somebody already has Fenwick.ai.
This is the curse of a standard last name, I have to say. Every time I've looked for a Bill Davis anything, it's like, you can be Bill Davis 9,000.
Yeah, you can be like the second person invited to Gmail beta, and they're like, sorry, Bill Davis already got that.
Got it, yeah. It got snapped up right after John Smith.
So GoDaddy says, we might be able to help you get it. See how?
Yes. We will buy it and broker it for you.
We will buy it and resell it to you for a small percentage. It's going to be a totally honest transaction, dude. Like, totally.
And no, there's no reason that you come back the second time and it's already owned.
IamGroot.coffee is available. IamGroot.life. There it is. I'm Groot PhD. That would
it's a
basically
different era, Jason. You need to look for IamGroot.decaf.
Well, it says so. I am Groot PhD would basically just say I am Groot and then give you a bill for $500.
There you go.
Definitely not on butter. I just bought butter like a week or two ago.
Jeffrey, your mic's on.
Did Alex physically check in this morning? Or should I bring up something to just in case?
He popped in for a second.
Okay.
I am Groot.
John, your camera's twitching.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. First hour is general discussion about just about everything around digital media production. And the second hour is usually something we want to spend a little bit more time on. And today we have Per Salbark and Per Larsson from Kilohearts on for the second hour. And they make a program called Phaseplant. And it's a crazy app. Like, it's just a crazy app. I saw it about a year and a half ago, and I was like, we have to get these guys on to show what this thing does and how it works. I barely understand it. It's really cool. So anyway, Phaseplant, it's a synthesizer. Well, I don't know what DSP, synthesizer, sound creator. So that's coming on in the second hour, so stay tuned for that. And if you have questions, go ahead and throw them into Makana right now. We've got a great panel here. Mickey is joining us, so you know that if you have technical film or audio questions, Mickey's going to be able to answer those, we think. So anyway, no pressure. Anyway, but go ahead and ask those questions if you care to. All right, let's go ahead and jump into the questions. Jason, what do we have?
First one is from Chris Sabato in Albany, Oregon. He writes in, I'm looking for playout software for a small stadium video board. I need quick playback, output to deck link, and to input at least one live source. Most inputs are short video loops or still images, preferably PC. I'm looking at Playdeck and QLab.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I don't know if I can speak highly enough of QLab, especially for this use case. You can, of course, bring in your videos and your stills for playout. But you can also bring in your live sources from the deck link or via NDI for putting out to your destination as well.
Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
If you end up with a Mac, MIDI can't be beat. That's MITTI.
Yeah, and on a Mac, the big three that I would consider is QLab, Softron, and MIDI. MIDI is probably the least expensive, and Softron's probably the most expensive of that bunch. On the PC, I actually don't know as many of the playback options that might be available there. A lot of people that I know that are doing this kind of thing are using the playback options within vMix or within OBS or within TriCasters, and so I think that market may not be quite as developed, but there's definitely more expensive ones like Watch Out that can play out those things, and so there's Resolume, I believe, will do play out Arena, as well as there are higher, much more expensive options, but as far as cost effective under $1,000, I'm not sure how many options there are. Next question.
Tim Holm in San Lorenzo, California writes in, what are some systematic steps for tuning a room for both live sound reinforcement, PA, and live stream? Note, not talking about mixing a room.
Yeah, go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I'm assuming you're talking more about more towards room treatment as opposed to room isolation or soundproofing. You would want to start by measuring the room modes and nulls of your room, like what frequencies resonate within the room and that tend to build up at specific areas of the room, and also what frequencies tend to get canceled out because of how the geometry of the room is. And also measure out the RT60. RT60 is the time it takes for reverberation in the room to lower down by 60 dB. Those would be your guiding. Those would be your guides in how to treat the room. And if you're not familiar with it, like I would highly recommend hiring an acoustics engineer to help you figure this out and also treat the room appropriately. Because if you're not treating the specific issues, then your investments in treating the room would be for not put to good use.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, tuning a room is very important to having a good measurement system, a good FFT, a microphone, an RTA type style microphone that will allow you, especially if you're bringing in the PA for that type of thing. If you're tuning for an amphitheater and the sound's going to be always there, and you got a sound guy there, then they'll have all those little specifics. But you also have to tune in two different ways. You have to tune for an empty room, and then you have to tune with a full room, because people change how things sound inside of any room whatsoever. As for the live streaming side, you don't have really don't have to tune anything, because if you're taking any sound from the room, then the sound guy you're usually taking the tune that they're setting up through like a cross mic or anything like that.
Go, Bill.
Yeah, I had the same process that's been described before. We used to do it by taking a measurement mic as opposed to any kind of a vocal mic that you'd use in a performance, and put it at the point where your listening person is going to be. For a small thing like we're doing here on Zoom, you'd put it as close to where your ears are as possible, and then run a frequency sweep across it and see if anything builds up or is diminished based on reflections from that space. That is an entirely different thing. And this has been said before than tuning a concert hall or something like that. That is much more complex, because obviously people are sitting in all sorts of different places, and a perfect sound at the focus in the middle may not be great on the outsides, or if you're sitting too near the subwoofer or too near a speaker stack, it's all going to be messed up a little bit. So it's a complicated thing.
Yeah, if you're getting serious about it, you definitely want to bring a professional in. Otherwise, there's definitely a lot of measurement tools that you can use on your own for smaller rooms. But if you're looking at a larger infrastructure, you really need to have somebody that has the proper tools and knows how to use them. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, and just for reference, like in terms of what I mentioned earlier, RT60, a recording studio control room, or even some better sounding TV studios would typically have an RT60 of 200 milliseconds and maybe a maximum of 500 milliseconds. But there's
and can you define that RT60 again? Is that the reflection of
how
sound?
How long it takes for the reverberation within a room to be diminished by 60 dB.
Mm-hmm.
Recording studio would be like in the 200, 300 millisecond range. But just knowing that it was Tim that's asking, some houses of worships are designed specifically to have the sound propagate all the way from the front to the rear of the house of worship without any amplification. So they're designed with reverberation in mind and wanting that reverberation. So those types of venues would have RT60s up to 10 seconds or even more.
That's great. Next question.
Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana writes in, what is the best way to have a full PDF of iMessages from a person timestamp showing for proceeding?
Go ahead, Jason.
Okay, full disclaimer, not a lawyer, but I've been an expert witness a time or two. My understanding of this is that anything with an affidavit will work. Anything that is provable is the person attesting that is them. But imazing.app is far and away the easiest way to do this.
Next question.
There it is. Tim Holm in San Lorenzo, California writes in, coach me when mixing in a dual environment, live sound and live stream. What are a few special things to keep in mind?
Go ahead, Mickey.
There's so many differences between mixing for front of house and mixing for broadcast. A couple of things to keep in mind is you would certainly want to mix separately for your broadcast mix from what your front of house PA is putting out. A lot of systems engineers and also mix engineers apply a response curve to their PA system, and a lot of times this has a significant bump in the response on the low end of things. So if you're putting out your front of house mix directly to your broadcast, you would certainly have, you could have, say, if you think it sounds like nice and full and like bassy in the room, it might actually come out very thin in the broadcast because of that curve. So you monitor your broadcast mix separately. The dynamic range for a front of house mix is typically much larger than what you would want for broadcast. Like, thinking of it in a digital meter scale. For front of house, you would typically have some speech on a digital meter at -40, and then suddenly have music rise up to minus 15 dBFS. So you have such a large dynamic range there. And typically for broadcast, that would be clamped down and dynamically compressed much more. And some platforms even have very, very strict, especially like terrestrial broadcast TV or cable TV, have very strict targets that you need to hit for your broadcast loudness. So your signals would be a lot more compressed and usually a lot louder in broadcast. And one thing that might be just a personal observation is, I think for broadcast, the acceptable noise floor is much stricter. People hear the noise more during broadcast, especially because of that I mentioned earlier, dynamic range compression. And so the noise floor is brought higher in the mix, relatively speaking, in terms of when you compare it to the other elements. While in the front of house mix, you have a PA system that is much further away. People are hearing the rest of the noise in the venue. Things are much stricter when it comes to broadcast.
Yeah, and the physics are just so much more different in a venue than they are in in the stream, in someone's headphones or even in their speakers. One of the big problems we have is that if you mix, let's say, a band or something that sounds good, as Mickey was talking about, the voice is going to sound way out in front if in the stream if you take the straight piece. So you really have to have somebody else paying attention to it. A lot of times we use submixes, and sometimes we have a separate operator in the same mixer with like an X Touch. That is just listening. They're taking what the main mixer is doing. They have an X Touch sitting next to it, and they're listening to what's going out to the stream and making the fine adjustments that are necessary to for generally the stems, not generally every channel, to kind of pull all those things back together. Now, go ahead, Jeffrey.
So yeah, with live streaming, the one thing that you want to do is you want to make sure that the live stream, the person that's running the live stream sound is way the heck away from the sound board. I always like to be where the monitor person is, because it's usually in behind the speakers. So in a very reverberant room, this is probably the best place where you're going to get the least amount of sound, so you can hear what's going on inside of there. If you are doing live sound and live streaming at the same time, you're juggling way too many balls. And it's going to be really tough. If you have to be at the soundboard to do any type of live streaming, then you might want to try and crawl underneath that soundboard to try to get rid of any of the amplified sound. And sometimes I do like to put up the the XY microphone, and then get so I can mix between a little bit of board and a little bit of what the sound guy is projecting on so they can have that live concert experience.
And go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, this is very complicated, as everybody has been speaking to. In the old days, when I used to do it, I only had to worry about live sound versus the recording that was going to be done in post. Now with live streaming, you have the third aspect of it. It's got to be live for the audience. It's got to be live for the streaming listeners or watchers. And most people want to capture that. The only thing that saved me was always doing channel inserts off the board to a multi-track recorder so that I could completely separately mix whatever post-production content I was going to do, because I never got even the first and the second right at the same time in real time. I always had to go back in and shape the sound on the recording to be its best. And that wasn't always the same as the music recording for the music production for the house and any streaming that you're doing in real time, trying to get exactly right.
Good, Mickey.
Yeah, just to add to what Alex mentioned earlier about mixing the broadcast mix on the same board. Like typically, you would want to aim for having a totally separate broadcast board so that you don't have to share, say, your processors, your FX engines with what front of house needs. But aside from if you're mixing on the broadcast on the same board, aside from using sends, say if you have a 64-channel board but you're only using 32 channels of it and it's a digital mixer, you can assign the same inputs to another set of 32 channels and create your broadcast mixer, and you can have your own EQ dynamics configured for your broadcast channels. And a lot of people do that.
Yeah, and if you are taking it from a live board, just be careful if we found that unless you have time to really set it up, the temptation will be to use MIDI or Dante, and just be careful of clocking issues. A lot of times we want to do some kind of analog pipe to get through those if we're doing a separate mixer, or we need a lot of time to really tune and make sure that the clocking issues aren't a problem for both MIDI and for Dante. Next question.
Mike Edwards in Brooklyn, New York writes in, morning everyone, is the X32 Rack the best rack mounted mixer available in the sub 4K range with Dante and automix capabilities? If not, what would the panel recommend? Thanks.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Specifically with automix capabilities, yeah, I think the X32 Rack is the best bang for the buck. Though there are other ways to add automix capabilities to your system aside from having it built into the board. Also, it kind of depends what is meant by better. Although I haven't had my hands on the Yamaha DM3, like I would wager that the preamps are a lot cleaner, at least like with higher gain situations, than the X32. And also, again, if you're open to having automix capabilities done on an external processor, there are also many analog boards that, and if analog boards work with your workflow, that's another option as well.
Go, Jeffrey.
Yeah, when it comes to rack mounting, that's not much option there. But when I saw the Yamaha DM3 at NAMM, I was pretty impressed. They have a couple different models, so their base model does come in at about $4,000. $2,000. Excuse me. Allen and Heath, they have some pretty impressive boards. I know that their SQ5 also does Dante, and that hits about the $4,000 level. The new Tascams are going to start at the $6,000 level, but once again, these are not rack mounted at this point. You have console boards at that point.
Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, I overlooked the rack mounted part. The M32 I thought was retailing right at the 4K mark.
Yeah, but if you're looking, I feel like at rack mounted, the two big ones are the TF line and the X32 line under $4,000. And the TF doesn't have, again, as Mickey said, you can find outboard, but a lot of times those automixes outboard is going to cost more money. So, so you have to, if you're trying to fit that in, we've been really happy with the X32. We were really excited about possibly getting a TF, and then it didn't have automix. Next question.
Peter Moore in Auckland, New Zealand writes in, thoughts on Behringer's new 4 LFO Eurorack module. Sounds awesome. He included a YouTube link.
I haven't been able to. This must be just a brand new release. I'm always interested. I have a lot of Behringer. It's where they're kind of like the toy synthesizers that you get to play with a little bit. But it's really cool to see them come out with these. I don't think anybody here has had any experience with them yet, but we'll maybe see if we can take a closer look a little later. Next question.
Craig Kadoki in Toronto, Canada writes in, Audinate has a new pricing option for Dante Virtual Sound Card that allows transferring the license between computers. It's almost double the price. Upgrading an existing license is the same $30 difference. Thought?
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, when they made the announcement last week, I found the pricing very interesting. Like at that price, I'd rather get another license at the $49 or $50 price.
Yeah, agreed. Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, I agree. It was a bit of a slap in the face. It's like, don't act like you've never revoked a license for me because I emailed you.
Next question.
Paul Walhoofs in Austin, Texas writes in, iOS 17 isn't even announced yet, but today Apple previewed an accessibility feature that allows users at risk of losing the ability to speak to create a voice that sounds like them in 15 minutes. Big deal?
Good, Jeffrey.
It's pretty decent. It's nice because then you can sit there and you can start typing stuff in, and then and have the phone convey what you're saying. And so if they can get it to work, 15 minutes seems to be a little bit low on the getting the process because there's so many different inflections. I could say, like for instance, when I when I do my videos, every now and then I'll have a point where I say something and it sounds all garbled, and I'll try and pull it from the earlier part of the video, and it just never really fits into place. So you'll have a lot of choppiness on that. But for the most part, it's a nice little feature if you want people, because we had when Roger Ebert had his vocal cords taken out. When they recreated that, it was a lot of people were really excited on that. Of course, you also have the whole idea of somebody trying to scam or deepfake you out of there. But for the most part, I think as long as it can stay in the phone, as long as there's security involved in that, I think it's a great feature.
Go ahead, Harshid.
I think accessibility-wise, it's giving a lot of people the tools that they need to be able to function in society. So definitely think that this is a good move that they're made. We have members that sometimes have speech impediments or whatnot. And, with that said, this is definitely a good tool to help that. And then I know that they're coming out with other features. There's a little article. So if you go to Apple's page or our Discord, you could read up more about it.
Go ahead, Bill.
I'm fascinated with this in terms of the fact that they must have some sort of script that you read through in your voice that gives them every single combination of sounds, phonemes, whatever, in order to then be able to draw from that repository and recreate your voice. I just think that would be fascinating to look at what the read this into the system and then we'll have your voice forever consists of. Probably a lot of things I had never thought about before.
Yeah, as soon as I think we talked about this a little bit yesterday, and I definitely talked about it on Mac Break, that I wanted the 2-hour version. Like if I can do something with a voice in 15 minutes, what happens if I feed you 2 hours or 20 hours or 200 hours? If I thought I was actually going to lose my voice, I would want to model it completely, and have it and do a whole bunch of different things. And so I hope that they expand what it does so that you can really capture a full resonance and character of someone's voice. And I think that maybe I'm guessing this is the first step down that path. Also, a lot of things that start out as accessibility also become oftentimes wider features. One of the things I think is really interesting is the possibility, if you're going iPhone to iPhone with iMessages, of when you have it read out it, you're driving and it's reading those, it could be reading them in the other person's voice. So if Bill sends something, it sounds like Bill. If Mickey sends it, sounds like Mickey. If Jason sends it, sounds like Jason. I think that's where we're going to see this go. They're going to start it with accessibility because it's a safe place to work and it makes it a bigger impact there. But I think that a year or 2 years from now, it'll start reading out, if you choose to, it'll start reading your iMessages out in your voice to other people. And I think that's a really interesting, it could be really interesting. And both good and bad, but I think mostly good. Go ahead, Bill.
To your point, though, does that mean you're going to have to go through and do a bunch of passes? I want a happy read. I want a angry read. I want all these tonalities that we use in human speech.
You'll have to have emojis that it's like audio emojis. Angry, read angry.
Scowling paragraph.
Yeah, scowling paragraph. Yeah, exactly. But it doesn't do that now. It's just kind of neutral if it reads it out. Next question.
Tony Mobley writes in from Noonan, Georgia. I have a friend who has an online business which is primarily in Zoom. She has a MacBook Pro and needs lights which can be mobile. Please share links and suggestions.
Go ahead, Bill.
Doing lighting for a situation you don't understand is always hard, but here's some things I will say. There are broad categories of lights which are very useful. Big sources, and it can be physically, or you can take a small bright source and put it in some kind of modifier to make it large, are something that are very useful, both in close-up work, like the kind of stuff we're doing now, where you want a soft light to hit your face and be kind of flattering, but also in terms of you go into a relatively large space and you want something bright enough to fill that space. So that's probably where I'd start. Some sort of reasonably bright small source that can be put into a diffuser to make it big. And it can be done a bunch of ways, but that's one of the first tools I would replace if all my lighting gear went away. Then after that, the next thing you're looking for is control modifiers. And that is things like flags or barn doors or things that can get light off of something so that you concentrate the light where you want it to go. That is only good if you're working with like a specific single person or something like that. As the number of people that you need to have light for increases, you're falling back to that broad fill to get everybody's light level up enough so they can be exposed properly. properly, excuse me. And then as you get more refined, you want to create mood and shadow and depth and things. And that requires even more gear. But that's where I'd start. I'd start with a couple of pretty bright, portable, battery operated. And we're lucky because in the LED area, that's much easier to achieve than it used to be when I was starting in lighting. And then you're going to just get more efficient and better as you go along.
Go ahead, Mickey.
And specifically with regards to fixtures, since 2020, I've been using a bunch of Nanlite Lumipad 11s and Lumipad 25 units, and also Pavo tubes, the short Pavo tubes. They're very portable. And in terms of what Bill mentioned earlier about diffusing the light, I've been known in the past to use creative ways of diffusing lights with with things like bed sheets, curtains. Like when I went out of the country in 2021, like I used bed sheets in the hotel room and curtains, and also covers of white translucent covers of plastic crates as diffusion.
Good, Jason.
I had a client who was in exactly this situation, and I found something that she really ended up liking. Rolling Square is a Swiss company that makes this super thin piece that you can like kind of roll off of the back of your MacBook, and it doubles as a charger for your iPhone, so you can use your iPhone as a camera. I'll put the link in the chat, but it features also a 280 lumen bulb. You can get two of these on either side, and for something like a webcam, when portability is and in this case cuteness is prime, then kind of can't beat this for $70.
Yeah, I all of our mini kits all have the Pavo Tube 6Cs. Those are the small tubes that Mickey was talking about. They're about a foot long or maybe a little less. I have 4 of them in my bag because I'm leaving right after this show for Washington, D.C. So I have 4 of them, and that's what I use. And so they've got a 1/4-20 on both ends. They run on battery as well as USB-C power, although you have to plug the USB-C into a USB-A power source. If it gets a USB-C power source, it stops charging. So it's a little tricky there. Those are the only things, but I use them every time I leave the office. I've experimented with lots of different lights and just kind of settled in on those. I take 4 of them. I have 2 of them that I can light my background with and 2 of them that I light myself with, and they've worked really well that way. Next question.
James Folson in Minneapolis, Minnesota writes in, just purchased a Stream Deck for the rotary encoders to more precisely control multiple parameters like color, page, and resolve, or a filter and cue in audio programs. How do I best set these up?
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
That's a really good question, because I don't think anybody's really focused on how the dials work on these things. Like for instance, if you have something like the Shuttle Pro, where you have this dial, it's you can really get it down to the brass tacks and push something to the right point. But those dials, they're really, it was basically meant for volume up, volume down type stuff. If you need to get very precise on that, I'm wondering if those dials are actually going to do that. And I'll definitely check that out and see if there's any issues that would come to using this in a precision type move.
I'm going to save you a lot of time. Sideshoweffects.net. So sideshoweffects.net is where you can get a profile pre-built for Resolve. That's what I use that's the number one way I use my my Stream Deck with the dials is in Resolve. And they've already built it all for you. They've got it set up. It's better than anything I would have designed. It works perfectly, and it's like, I don't know, $30, $40. It's worth it. They make a bunch of them for Final Cut and other apps as well. There's lots and lots of apps they build. That's all they do is build. Well, as far as I know, it's all they do is build Stream Deck profiles for pro apps. And so Sideshow Effects is the one that I would recommend. Next question.
Yeah, big +1 on that one. Paul Walhus in Austin, Texas writes in, how many USB mics can you run on a Zoom session or podcast at the same time? And how do you do it?
Go ahead, Mickey.
You can use tools like Loopback to bring all the USB mic channels into a single virtual audio interface, and use that to route the signals into your DAW or Zoom Though if there are situations, if the situation allows for audio to bleed between microphones, I would definitely not. I would recommend against it because if the analog to digital converters are not word clocked together, and you get bleed between the microphones, you will hear what would appear to be like echo because the samples are not being generated at the exact same point in time.
And a lot of times we've definitely used a lot of mics, a lot of USB mics together in those areas. And high off axis rejection is really important in general, but more so if you're doing a bunch of sources. Quick reminder that if you we've got a great panel here answering a lot of great questions, especially audio. Today, of course, is our audio day. So if you have audio questions, you've seen a lot of audio questions pop up here, but if you've got audio questions, this is a perfect day to ask them. So go ahead and throw those questions in. We've still got another half an hour left in our first hour, which is general discussion. And then, of course, if you do a little research while you're listening to us and check out Kilohearts and you start to build up some questions there, go ahead and throw those in as well. Let's go ahead and jump into the next question.
Douglas Carmichael writes in, failure is a part of any profession, but have you ever had to alert management that something is an incident waiting to happen? How do you do that diplomatically?
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I think all the time. I think it's a part of almost any job, like making people aware about the specific aspects of your entity, your company, your production. I think you just have to be straight to the point. There shouldn't be any hesitation to let people know what the concerns are, because things that could be that could be an incident waiting to happen could affect the entire entity. So just let people know, be straight to the point, let them know what the circumstances are and what the possible outcomes are if certain actions aren't done. So don't hesitate about it.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeffrey.
There's no failure here. We never have failure. No. So a lot of times it depends on the scale of the failure. And where you are, you're usually going to be ending up to fill out some sort of form because a lot of it's going to be through some sort of tracking, especially in like an office setting or anything like that. If it's super critical and yelling at the high rafters probably is not the best way to do that. But basically just note everything that's going on and bring all that information with you when you go to the top to say, this needs to be replaced absolutely right now. And then they have, if you've collected all the facts to show that that's going to fail in the next 24 hours, 48 hours, for example, then they have to listen to you. And if they don't listen to you, then you have a fully documented list of what you did to make sure that this wasn't going to fail. And then they just let it happen.
Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, and I want to concentrate, Douglas, on the last word you use here, which is diplomatically, because this is a big thing. Pointing out problems is part of every crew person's job. If you see something that can really damage the production, you have a responsibility to bring it to people the next level up, or even higher than that if it's actually something that's safety-oriented or something like that. But what I wanted to be careful to just mention is that if you're the person who's always looking for what's wrong, and that's all you're ever talking about is I found this error or this error, or this could go wrong or this could go wrong, that has a negative effect on how people kind of perceive you as a part of the set community. And so just be gentle about it. Try to balance the things you find that are wrong, which are important, with things that you praise that are right, so that you have a pretty balanced approach to that. And people don't think you're just the person who's crying wolf.
Go, Jason.
Tact is the ability to make a point without making an enemy. So in this case, I think instead of diplomatically, it should be tactfully. I would simply say, look, I'd be remiss if I didn't at least point this out. And the judgment comes in to who you tell and when, not when they're extremely stressed out, worried about something else. And yeah, just keep a mental note of your ratio. If you're always that guy, then you're remiss too often.
I do everything I can to solve the problem invisibly. So if I see it happening, I do, what can I do to not have that happen? The second thing I do is I'll go to the person who's working on that and start asking them questions. The goal is to ask questions so that they see the problem without me telling them that there's a problem. Just like, hey, how is this working? And what is this going to do? And how is this going to go over there? And suddenly, it might dawn on them. And the third thing is to talk to them about it if that didn't work. And then you go to someone who might be at a different level. But the mistake most people make is they go straight to somebody else, or they just start telling people what to do. And to get back to the diplomatic and tactfully, you have to draw that out very, very carefully, especially in a corporate environment. People will see it as attacking you, and then they will want to get rid of you. So especially if they feel like, and I've done it. I've definitely done that where I may upset a lot of people by just saying that isn't working. So I've learned to be more tactful. Next question.
Paul Walhus in Austin, Texas writes in, what are the most consecutive hours you have on any piece of gear? Do you pay attention to this?
Bill, quick.
And I've got a weird answer, but yeah, I was thinking, what do I use the most now? And would I have used the most earlier in my career? And you know what it came down to? My Apple Watch. And it's a weird thing, but because I started out with it not having anything to do with my business, but then I found more and more. And between being able to time spots and being able to just the myriad of things that it does, including communications, both when things are normally going, checking email, checking messages, checking text and things like that, but also quick communications in circumstances where something's going wrong and somebody that I love knows about it and says, hey, this thing is going wrong over here. That has turned out to be the thing I probably spend the most hours interacting with every single day of my life now. It's been weird.
You go ahead, Jason, real quick.
Depends on the piece of gear. Instead of counting in hours, you can always go with shutter count. I have more than once rolled entirely the total shutter count of a Canon full-frame DSLR. And at least one of them had no incident even after it was corrected.
Next question.
Peter Moore in Auckland, New Zealand writes in, is there any office hours, after hours interest in Superbooth 2023?
I'd love to hear what happened. I think it just happened. I think it happened last week, I believe. Superbooth, for those listening, is for high-end or just lots and lots of manufacturers for synthesizers and Eurorack and all kinds of other things. It's like probably the biggest conference in the world for that. I think it'd be fun to cover in more detail. So hopefully next year. Next question.
Kenny Hampton in Greenville, Illinois writes in, Alex is working on his portable remote kit for the Insta360 Link cameras. How will these cameras be controlled remotely? My Insta360 control is quite sensitive for my local Mac and not ready for prime time.
Yeah, it's funny because I don't find mine to be overly sensitive from a screen sharing perspective. I can just simply go in there and move where I want it to go. Maybe I've just gotten used to it, but I'm not trying to use the controls. You can click on the image and just move it to where you want it. I click on this and I move it down and it just moves the thing. It's very, very seamless. There's two different ways that we can control it. The mini kit that I'm sending out is going to have a Mac Mini with screen sharing. So basically, I can just go into the Mac Mini and grab onto that control of those cameras and adjust them there. So that's one way that I'm doing it. And basically, one of the things I'm working on is putting it's a little HDMI that just tells the computer that it's got a second screen, even though so just like a little loop. Then you just put it in and it'll tell that it's got a second screen. That way that Mac Mini will create two screens. And so I can have a screen that is, that's going to be the Zoom that they're looking at, and another screen that's kind of a work area. So that's kind of what I'm working on there. So you can either screen capture in and move those cameras around. One of the things I think is going to be important for a mini kit like this is presetting most of the positions that I want. So I want the stove, or I want the thing, or I want the table, or I want other things like that. And then finally, you can control it via Zoom through the Zoom room. You can request control of those cameras and control them remotely. And so we don't expect to, we're not going to be doing pans during the shot. We're just trying to get to new things. And again, it'll probably be something that we rehearse. We figure out where it needs to be, and then we have presets for that. So during a show, we wouldn't have to do that. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, that would kind of scare me to have something like an InstaLink that all of a sudden fail during the show. Of course, any camera can fail during a show, but to have one that all of a sudden starts to turn around and show the backside, that would kind of scare me. I'm assuming you're going to have something like a Brio on the standby just in case, right?
Nope. What I think is that I have not seen that happen with the camera. So I haven't experienced that with the Insta360. When it loses contact, it just stops moving. I don't see it actually do anything other than the very beginning when it does a reset. So yeah, we're going to send out 4 of those. If it turns around in the kit that I'm building, all it'll see is black because the main camera is inside of a cover that sits behind a screen. So it's not gonna. There's no way for you to. It's not gonna be able to see anything behind it. It only sees what's in front of it. If it starts turning, it's just gonna go black. Next question.
Robin Cutshaw writes in from Atlanta, Georgia. The X32 Rack has a MIDI interface. Do you use this mainly for control, or can you plug musical instruments to it and use for the MIDI interface to your computer?
Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, it's for control.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, as Jason mentioned, that's for control. I know of people that have used drum pads to recall snippets or scenes for, say, for theater, and also some people use foot pedal MIDI controllers to, say, kill reverb while a musician is speaking instead of singing or performing.
Next question.
Edwin R. Ruiz writes in from Chicago, what is the best practice for transforming a Resolve 18 database from an old MacBook Pro to a MacStudio? Database is backed up already.
I don't know what the best practice is. I mean, typically you should be able to just move it. I mean, it should be self-contained. That folder shouldn't have any extraneous pieces. So you should just be able to just drag and drop it from one place to the other. The one thing I will say is that oftentimes I try to keep those on. I try to keep the databases and pretty much anything specific to the app when I'm in production, trying to keep it on a separate drive. So it just kind of moves. So I just move the drive with it. So try to think about when you're doing this move, try to not move it from a Mac Pro to a MacStudio, try to move it from a Mac Pro to an external drive. And then you're going to put stuff on. It's better to keep it all self-contained, and I keep that with my media, and I keep it on a RAID, or I keep it on a bunch of other things, and so that I have all the stuff that I need there. Now, you may want to separate those into 2, but I would still have it as an external drive, so you don't have to think about this. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael writes in, Nick mentioned a dozen Unreal engines during his discussion of virtual production yesterday. Could you virtualize the engine to reduce power and cooling needs?
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I would imagine if your virtualization solution allows direct to metal access to the GPU, you can theoretically virtualize the multiple instances, though it's also good to point out that depending on the scale, virtualization might not necessarily lessen the cooling and power usage.
Go, Jason.
Well, and for a little bit of context here, Nick was referring to failover. That was the point. In which case, I think virtualization is probably not ideal.
I think he thought half of those computers were failover potentially. Generally, if you're working with fairly simple geometry, you probably could do this. If you're working with anything complex, the reason that you're putting it on separate computers is because you're throwing GPUs at it to render it out in real time. So especially in broadcast, and typically they would probably want all of those machines to be separate, separate for the backup, separate for and they're not worried about the power. Like like they're not, like if they're compared to many other things that they're doing, the power that those PCs are going to take up is minuscule. So I don't think that they're that worried about that process. We've had ones where we have a PC with 4 GPUs in it to do the rendering, and now we did. I will admit, in Vegas outside, we did have air conditioning just for those units, but power wasn't the biggest problem that we had. Next question.
Paul Walhoofs in Austin, Texas writes in, what are some great mics for an iPhone? Samsung, Android?
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
So it really depends on what you're going to be doing with this. Wired mics over wireless mics every single time. The Shure MV7, perfect is a perfect microphone. They have the app that allows you to do some sort of control with your microphone. A dynamic microphone will always work for like a podcast, but if you're doing something that needs a little bit more sound on there are microphones that are also USB that you can definitely get. The Rode coming out with, they have the new Pod Mic USB, and then their cardioid microphone, I can't remember the number on it. It's also going to be a hybrid microphone that you can use, and you can plug directly into the phone if you need to get something with more ASMR or something like that into it. But that's just USB. Of course, you can change the gamut if you put a mixer into it and use XLR microphones.
Go ahead, Bill.
Well, I took this as written mics for an iPhone, which means you're going to be dealing with Lightning traditionally, although, as everybody understands now, Apple appears to be pivoting toward USB-C as their connector because of the whole European Union process. So I think if you're going to buy something now for a mic with Lightning, the big ones that I see after doing a little bit of research, the Shure MV88 seems to be pretty popular, as are the Zoom IQ6 and the Rode SC6. Those are things that you can plug directly into the Lightning port, and they will work with your iPhone if it's Lightning connected. As we move to USB-C, there's going to be a huge variety of things because that's a different connection circumstance. And as Jason just mentioned, I'm sorry, as Jeffrey just mentioned, there's interfaces you can get. For example, Alex and I have talked about the Saramonic Lightning connected XLR inputs. If you get one of those, you can use virtually any mic on the planet. It also has phantom power and allows for dynamics to work as well.
Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, and of course, just to reiterate, any class-compliant USB-C device, which of course is not an iPhone yet, will work. But the iRig Pro is the one that historically I've used with pretty good success. I think it takes a 9-volt battery, and yeah, it's not amazing, but pretty good.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I was going to say what Jason mentioned, that class compliant, the USB audio interfaces will work with both iPhones and iOS and also iPad OS. And I've played around with multi-tracking and GarageBand for the iPad, and have done, I think, I've filled up a Focusrite 18i20 and it recorded without a hitch.
Yeah, the one that I use the most is what Bill was talking about. This is the Saramonic, and it has a quarter 20 on the back so that you can attach it to something, like a small rig that might be on your phone, and Lightning on the way in, 9-volt battery. This is a great little box. You can, of course, put just about anything into it. If you go Lightning and then you have a Lightning power to USB, that USB now can connect to just a wide variety, as Mickey said, of anything out there. So you need that little Lightning to USB, but it's Lightning to USB with Lightning. It's because that way you can power the phone. And then from that, we've connected our USB Pre-2s to our as an interface. But this one's been really nice. What we do with this one typically is we throw it on a rig, and then I have this is 2 mics, and we've put 2 electrosonic receivers on the rig. So we'll hang it on the rig and then feed those into that, and then we have a wireless connection to either mics with mic plugs or labs or whatever else we're using there. Next question.
Steve Bauer in Seattle would like to know, Alex, what remote desktop software do you use to access and control the Mac Minis that you include in your kits?
We have AnyDesk on the computers to get into it, but then we use AnyDesk to get into Apple Remote Desktop. so we prefer Apple Remote Desktop. It has the most number of features that we want, and so because we're using Mac Minis, that's the easiest way to do that. But sometimes we have a little bit of a juncture problem, transversing the network to get to it. So we find that if we have AnyDesk there, we can turn on the VPN if we need to, or do other things that are necessary inside of that. If the Mac Mini doesn't have the VPN, doesn't need one, or doesn't, sometimes what we have is a Meraki that's in the box. And so the Meraki provides the VPN to the computer. And in those cases, we generally don't need the VPN to be turned on. But for Mac Minis without a Meraki box, then we need, these little MX3s or whatever, or Z3s. You need to have something that you can get to on it, and then you can turn it on, and then you can turn the VPN on, and then we can turn the Apple Remote Desktop on. Go ahead, Jason.
And, just to give you a few more options, in a dirty pinch, Zoom desktop control will absolutely pretty much get you there.
The trick is turning it, when you turn it on, it has to call home and you have to get to it without Zoom.
Right.
Like that's it's that first step that we're always working on. So AnyDesk can have it set up so that there's I just type in something, and if it's on, it's going to come up, and then we go from there. Next question.
Paul Walhoos writes in, what's the one audio product you look forward to seeing?
There's so many. Usually I'm always looking forward to, if you're talking about releases, I'm always looking forward to whatever Sound Devices does next. Usually I'm pretty excited about their products. Next question.
Edwin R. Ruiz writes in from Chicago, I'm finding the Samsung T5 drive to be less available at stores and now looking for new storage options for my production Blackmagic Cinema Camera 6S's.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, my recommendation is still sticking with CFast cards. I'm not a big fan of using USB-C drives at non-locking USB-C with non-locking USB-C cables for your production camera storage needs. But aside from that, if you're locked into using an external hard drive or external SSD, I'm seeing more and more of the SanDisk Pro Blade SSDs being used.
Go ahead, Jason.
OWC makes a USB-C enclosure that, when paired with their drive or even a less expensive drive, is extremely rock solid. I completely agree with Mickey that you always want another card in there for backup, for failover, because, USB-C can be completely problematic. That said, I've yet to be disappointed by OWC.
Yeah, I build my own with NVMEs. So I build these when I'm not using the T5s. The problem with the T5s is the small rigs that I got have a T5 slot in them. So I still use a lot of the T5s for that because there's already a slot built into it. But I also build these. This one I built with a fan, so that it can reserve heat if I'm pushing a lot of data at it. And they've worked pretty well for a variety of the Blackmagic cameras. It is, I agree that you always want to CFast. The real problem that I have with CFast is they're so expensive. So I have a couple CFast that I always have in there. I have one in there, and I will record to that, especially if it matters. But for a lot of things that I have, I still use it because a lot of times it's just a matter of how much data am I going through. But I always have a CFast card in the camera, but I don't always use it. I don't always use that because of the cost. Yeah, Bill.
This is the OWC version of the NVMe drive with USB-C, and I've been using it almost exclusively now for quick backups as I do these long work sessions. It's really super fast, and it's very affordable, and it's been rock solid. So I'm kind of splitting the difference between where Mickey was and where Jason was.
Next question.
James Fosslin in Minneapolis, Minnesota writes in, have you thought about creating a Stream Deck Plus plugin to use encoder dials to control Phaseplant?
I think this is.
Yep, sorry. That's what popped up.
Yeah, let's go to the next question.
All right, Ben, there we go. Ben Woodward writes in from New Glarus, Wisconsin, when recording audio, is it recommended to use digital audio recorded on a computer, or is the USB out on the front of a Behringer or X32 as capable?
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
I've done many recordings using the USB out. I've done multi-track recordings using, and these are, we're talking Behringers from 5-6 years ago. So even the newer ones, you should be able to get something out of it. The quality, I'm not sure what bit rate you can get off of that. It's been a while since I've done that, but I know you can at least get 24-bit out of it.
Yeah, my recommendation is always to try to record in two places. So I would record to the USB there, and then if you have a Dante card connected to that X32, you can use a program called like Boom Recorder. Boom Recorder is a Dante it'll take a Dante input and just record all the tracks for you. So you can route those all. So having two different ways that you're recording all of those, and then of course the next step up from that, if you want to add a rack, is a Joko. And we have one of those in a Joko. You can just route, I think it's 64 channels to it, and then just hit record, and it's going to record it to a USB drive. And we've been using Jokos for a long time. Yeah, go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, the USB recording capabilities right on the front panel of the X32s, I believe, are just limited to 2 tracks. So if that's enough for your needs, then I don't see a downside to it. It should be able to record the 44.1 or 48 kilohertz, whatever sample rate your desk is set to. But yeah, a standalone recorder would be ideal, especially in terms of stability. But DAW, especially on a appropriately configured computer, ideally with hardware DSP capabilities, would that's running a DAW should also be a good solution.
Go ahead, Bill. I'm sorry. Next question. I just threw it at Bill. I just threw a ball at Bill, and he's like, "What am I talking about?
What am I answering?"
Yeah, exactly.
Robin Cutshaw writes in, I plugged a Shure MV7 into an X32 via XLR, even turning up the gain to full on the input. The mic is low. Does it need a preamp?
Go, Bill.
Yes, that's symptom number one. If you're turning it up all the way and it's still not loud enough, you need some sort of amplification stage in there. Generally, I think the MV7 and mics in that kind of class are said to need at least 60 dB of clean gain beforehand. There are devices you can use to boost it, but generally they tend to be noisy. So I would find somewhere in your chain to get enough amplification, preamplification, really, to get that mic level up to being a usable signal cleanly.
Go, Jason.
Although I've never done this with an MV7, my immediate thought is something's not right here. If it's really, really low, yes, it's a dynamic mic. Yes, it needs a lot of gain. But I mean, just clear your channel and like be dead sure that you really can't power that mic.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I think it would help if you specify what low means when you say mic is low, because if you're trying to aim broadcast levels, especially broadcast to web levels, which are super loud, you would need a significant amount of gain, not necessarily just on your head amp, your preamp, but also gain added further down the line after your compression stages. You usually, for broadcast, you'd have multiple stages of compression, each one with makeup gain, and that would get you to an appropriate level for broadcast. So having context of what low means and what your goals are in terms of your levels may allow us to answer the question more appropriately.
Next question.
Tony Mobley in Noonan, Georgia writes in, have the Samsung T7 external drives improved?
You know, I go ahead, Jason.
In my very humble opinion, nope.
Yeah. So for those listening, the problem with the T7 drives is there's a different cache in the T7 drives. And so the T5 drives T5 and T7 have different caching units inside of these Samsungs. I don't know why Samsung chose to use different ones. And the problem is that the T7 will, when connected to a camera and getting a lot of data, will actually stall out. And so that's why it wasn't certified for the Blackmagic cameras. We do find that we can record a lot of things on it, but we have seen failures repeatedly in long driving records. And so we don't recommend T7s for any major work. We wouldn't put T7s into production. What we recommend is putting T5s into production and then using the T7s as backups. They work fine that way. The one thing to note is that in the 1 terabyte versions at about 440 gigabytes, they will drop to almost zero as far as the transfer space. So if you're doing a large transfer, you'll look at it and you say, oh, that's going to take 15 minutes. It's really going to take an hour. so it's and we think that it's heat related, to these drives or a cache related. But at some point, if you just start pulling those drives back to each other, they're gonna go for a while and then it's just going to fall off and not be as useful. Next question.
Peter Moore in Auckland, New Zealand writes in, thoughts on Marshall being sold to Swedish co-Zound?
There's always that we constantly are seeing this churn. so I guess I don't have any strong opinions about it. I don't use a lot of Marshall equipment right now. Next question.
Tony Mobley also writes in, is anyone using DaVinci Resolve on an M1 iPad? What is the experience like using it on the iPad?
I haven't done a production on the iPad yet, but I have played with it. It's a lot of fun. I think that it's going to be really interesting to see what the uptick is of the iPad versions versus the iPad version of Final Cut. So I think that is the thing that we're going to kind of see this kind of push back and forth between Resolve and Final Cut. And what they're really vying for is not so much professionals that are doing high end. Well, maybe Resolve is, but I think that what they're really vying for is the social media creator market and the educator market and the corporate markets. And that's what Final Cut and Resolve are going to aim for with those iPads, is that it gives you kind of a really nice mobile solution to make a lot of that work. All right. we are going to jump into our second hour. And I'm just really excited to have Per Salbark and Per Larsson on our show with us. I just, as a precursor, I saw Phaseplant. We've been trading emails, I think. I've been trading emails with Kilohearts for maybe a year and a half. And I was like, oh my gosh, I have to get these guys on. Because I saw it. And the scene that I saw was a helicopter getting, there was an audio of a helicopter taking off. And it was all done inside of this program called Phaseplant, which I had never heard. And I follow a lot of sound designers on Twitter. And so it was just someone threw it up and I clicked on it. And then my mind just popped out of my head. I was just like, what is going on here? And looking at the video of how it all gets put together is just amazing. And I opened it and I kind of didn't understand how it worked. And I was like, I'm not going to try to figure this out. I'm going to try to get them to come on the show and talk about what they were thinking, show us a little about how it works, and for all of us to learn together, because I think it's just a groundbreaking application. And I'm just really, really excited to have the folks from Kilohearts on today. So Per, it's good to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Can you tell us a little bit about what led up to Phaseplant?
Well, we're here to talk about Phaseplant, but really it's sort of the cherry on top of a long stretch of work that we've done over the last 10 years. We started out doing sort of smaller effects modules and then built up with larger sort of host plugins that then utilize those modules inside. And then finally, in 2019, we were ready to launch Phaseplant, which builds upon that entire ecosystem of existing products. So it's sort of an emergent system, if you will, where simple little building blocks make for or almost unlimited sound design possibilities, where you can make some really, really complex sound design. And like you mentioned, the helicopter sound with, a bunch of different variables that you can change over time to make it sound like it's landing or accelerating or whatever. I think maybe you saw someone from Twitter who did that sound. There's a specific guy who does a lot of engine sounds and stuff like that, and he makes it incredibly detailed. He can pinpoint the make of a car. It's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, and what were the plugins as you built these modules? What were they designed to run inside of? So how did that begin?
So they're all made for use in a DAW. Anyone really. We support all of the formats. But yeah, you typically, our intention was for you to use them in music making. But since the usages have grown a lot, and we see more and more people in TV and cinema, and also in video game design and just general sound design, using our products more and more because of the vast capabilities of like combinations of these sort of simple modules, really.
And did you know that you were eventually going to pull them all together into one application?
Yeah, that was definitely the goal from the start. But it was eventually reached that point where we could like build the synthesizers and have all those modules in there.
So the idea was basically to start with just start with something that you could start selling and making money at while you and slowly build all the components and then pull them all together.
Yeah.
And that was quite a journey. It took us like 10 years, and for the first 7 of those, we were absolutely not profitable until we then eventually launched Phaseplant, and everyone thought it was an overnight success. But behind every overnight success, there's 10 years of hard work.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And the interesting thing there, though, is I'm certain that you learned things though about it that affected. If you had built the app all at one time, it probably wouldn't have been as useful.
No, absolutely not. No. So yeah, it was a great learning experience, and we keep building at it. Our goal is to make it even more competent in the future with feature updates that are always free. So we're sort of building something that we hope people will find great usage for many, many years to come.
Are you able to show us the app? Are you?
Yes, we are.
Yeah, I would love. I think people are like, what are they talking about? So I think we'll jump into showing the app here.
Yeah. 1 second.
Get the screen sharing going.
See, it's starting up. Oh, I see it. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is now running inside Ableton Live. But as Per mentioned, you can run it in most DAWs. And it's sort of a modular system. Actually, when you open it up, it's completely blank like this. And then you add what you need. So you usually start by adding an oscillator, and that you can immediately start playing that, and it's polyphonic, and it just works. And you can keep adding different generator modules here. We got analog oscillators, granular, which we just added in the last update. It's a granular engine, so you drop your sample in here and it'll play short snippets of it and break it down.
That's very quiet.
I'm not sure if we're hearing that.
Sounds good here on the side.
Yeah, metal grinding. Maybe not the best demo sound there. I picked one at random. We got a noise generator. We got wavetables. And
can you explain how each one of these work? Now, are they automatically stacking together as you add them here?
Yeah, so they'll automatically route together. So you'll see on the side here, there's little arrows that sort of show how these get mixed together. Then they go through this amplitude envelope. You can adjust, and then they go out to the right part here, which are effects. So here you can add say you want a delay on that.
This noise is probably loud.
You can stack your effects here, and you can just keep adding as many as you like. And we have 30 something.
And is there a limit to the number in each lane? And is the lane kind of how do the lanes work with each other?
Yeah, so the routing by default is that the generator section goes into lane 1. Lane 1 goes into lane 2, lane 2 goes into lane 3, and lane 3 goes out to the master. But you can change that.
Why would you use multiple lanes as opposed to just stacking them up in lane 1?
Well, you could choose to start a different group here. So you have a different layer, and you can send that to lane 2, for example, so it skips the effects in lane 1. Or you can have both lane 1 and 2 go to lane 3, so you can do different combinations like that.
Parallel processing so you can do some specific effects to certain layers of your sound.
Yeah, exactly. And you can even send your generators straight to master if you want. For example, if you have a sub layer that's just a basic sine wave, you don't want a reverb on that, you just send that straight to the.
So you can bypass all the layers or send them to specific layers and then mix the layers together as you go through it. That's great.
Yes. And down here you got your modulators. So if you want to, you're on an LFO or an envelope, just drop in as many as you like. We also have these curves, which are sort of envelopes, but more free-form. And you have a little editor where you can sort of...
One of the things I have to say that one thing that I really like is how pleasing the interface is. I'm sure that you spent a lot of time on that.
We did actually. It's probably the one thing that makes, I wouldn't say the one best thing about it, but it was certainly the thing that turned our little corner of this market on its head when we launched Phaseplant, because there are hundreds and hundreds of software synthesizers out there available with sort of a fixed architecture setup where you have 2 oscillators or 2 wavetables and a noise generator, and then you have 2 filters and 1 LFO and whatnot. And that's just the fixed architecture of that particular software synthesizer. So making an interface where you were able to add the pieces you want as you want them without many limitations is something that people really, really appreciate with this software.
And I'm going to back up a little bit and have you just kind of describe, because some folks that are watching here aren't going to know exactly what just got all got added there. So you start generally with an oscillator, right? That's generating the tone, right? And how do you choose what oscillator that you're using?
So let's start from a fresh slate here. So the analog oscillator is if you want to emulate an analog synth.
Right.
It has only a few waveforms. You have the sawtooth wave, square wave, triangle wave, sine wave. And it also has this sync feature where you can make it go like that kind of thing. For the square wave, you also have the pulse width modulation kind of thing there.
These are great for if you want to use these types of waveform like very raw without many effects to them.
Right.
You can get, I want to say Nintendo kind of sounds, very very basic, like old timey electronics type of sound.
Right.
So if you want to emulate an analog synthesizer, this is also a good place to start because you get this super crisp waveform as a starting point, and then you add filters to it and distortions and whatever.
And the envelope is the attenuation over time. Is that?
Yes, exactly.
So if you want to make something like a piano sound, you would have a pretty sharp attack at the beginning, followed by a pretty like slopey fall off, imitating the sound that a piano does, where most of the energy in the hit is in that initial.
Now you just dragged that. So what did that do right there when you drag from one to the next?
So what I did was I added a filter here in between the output envelope and the oscillator. And then I added another envelope down here, a modulation envelope, which is not connected to anything when you add it. You can grab the value of it here, and then everywhere you can route that lights up.
This is what so when I downloaded Phaseplant and put it into my DAW, when I clicked on one of those and all those plus signals came up, I realized you can use the output from almost any part of this, right, to attenuate almost any other setting. Is that correct?
Exactly. That's correct. So again, this is also available in many soft synthesizers, but probably I wouldn't say to this extent. Many other soft synths will have something called a modulation matrix, which is more like an Excel sheet of which value is going to affect which other value in your sound. But we wanted to do like inspired by modular synthesis, where like in hardware where you have cables going back and forth to control these types of things. We wanted to do something that was visual like that, but didn't necessarily clutter your screen with too many cables. So our cables only show up when you're interested in them. When you like.
Are you able to see them all somewhere? Is there a way to display them? Like hit a button and have them all kind of show up?
What you'll see is that this knob is now orange, meaning it's modulated by something. And if I hover that, all the modulation going into it appear under it. And if I hover them, you'll get this sort of line showing that connection. So, and you can also hover the source here and see.
There is no way to see all of the connections that. I'm sorry.
Is that a shadow on the?
Yeah, it is. There is no way to see all the modulations as once, because for a simple patch that might be very useful, but people use the system to create some monstrosities in complexity where they have hundreds of these connections, and showing them all on screen at once is going to be absolutely terrible. So there's no way you kind of have to explore the pieces for yourself. So Phaseplant, the main UI of Phaseplant was designed for people creating their own sort of soundscape or sound from scratch, and we wanted to give you like a clean slate to start with. So even though you can go extremely deep and become very, very complex, as long as you're the designer for this particular sound, you added each piece of complexity yourself. So you sort of have a bit of an understanding of how your sound works, which makes it easier for you to navigate it. whereas many other synthesizers will have, they will show you all of their features on screen at once. Even if you're just using 10% of that for your sound, you're going to see all of those options, and it's going to like cause a serious information overload. So that's one of the key reasons that Phaseplant also looks like the way it does. But maybe we could load it a particularly complex preset just to show you the depths that some of our sound designers go to. I like to show from the Book of the Dead that one, like this one, and then it's also called Book of the Dead, the preset. So this is one of our an artist that we work together with. His name is Jake. He's called Kill the Noise. He's out of LA, I think, and he makes sort of dubstep, very aggressive bass music. And this particular preset, as you can see, it has like hundreds of parts to it. But what he did here is he actually built not one instrument, but I guess 6 or 7 different instruments in the same preset, and then when you play a single note, it'll play you a full song. So,
shall we have a go?
Yeah, let's listen to it. Actually,
the computer can barely handle it with all the streaming and everything at the same time. Unfortunately.
But it'll just keep on. It'll work through a whole song when it.
Exactly. It has a beat with drums and layers and everything.
Yeah, but if we want to show something more, useful, maybe the Flutiophone.
Yeah.
And do these come with it, or are these just examples that you have, or does it come with very many presets?
The one I'm about to load is part of the factory bank, so that's included. The last one from the Book of the Dead, that's a sound bank that we sell on our site.
Oh, nice. Okay.
If you get the subscription, though, then you'll get all the sound banks as well. So that's what this works better. I'm not a good keyboardist, but I hope it came through. There was a nice flute sound there.
No, it definitely came through. No,
yeah, and this is built up.
So tell us a little bit about what's happening here and what we're looking at.
Right. So yes, so this one specific preset is made by Rob Swire from Knife Party and Pendulum. And what he did here is he wanted to make a natural sounding instrument that is based off of most of those the analog generator that we told you about early on. Right. So you can tell at the top there's that sine wave that is sort of the basis of this sound. It is followed by a series of extra sine waves that are all set to no volume, so they look like they're just flat lines. But the thing is, he modulates them in creative ways during playback. You see that those. So
this gets into they have zero base setting, but then you're connecting them to the other. Yeah.
Right. So they're depending on how you play your keyboard, they will increase in volume during playback in creative ways that I couldn't explain exactly how we made it because it's very complicated. This one. But he uses, as you can tell, there
and so when you see that stack next to the sine wave at the bottom, those are all different connections. It's connected to all. So that one envelope is, or LFO, is it an LFO?
It's an LFO.
Is running a bunch of other things.
So it's opening and closing a filter, and then it's also slightly detuning all of those silent analog generators, and also like affecting their amplitude. So I guess that's sort of where that little bit of vibrato feeling to the flute comes in.
And there's also a feature we haven't really talked about yet, which is FM. Just like I can take the modulation from this LFO and put it almost anywhere. I can grab the output of an oscillator like this and route it. And then the selection is a lot more limited where I can go with it, but I can take the output from this oscillator and route it into the phase of this oscillator, for example, to create FM synthesis. that way, and that's
frequency modulation. Right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's what this patch is doing a lot of. If you look at this oscillator here, it's a clean sine wave, but once I start playing,
it distorts.
The phase of that sine wave is actually distorted, and that's where the overtones are coming from. That makes it sound like a flute.
Mm-hmm.
That's great.
And then on your right-hand side, you can see that there are several effects going on here. So there are a few filters. There's a little bit of distortion.
And what's the 8 voices?
Reverb.
What's the ensemble?
Ensemble is it's almost like a chorus effect, where we multiply the incoming sound into 8 copies, and then those copies are detuned and stereo spread in an interesting fashion, and then mixed together so that you get sort of a weird stereo and pitch movement throughout your sound. Yeah,
whatever you feed into it, you'll sound like that's played in unison, like many times.
Yeah. And does it have any surround capabilities as past stereo?
It's only stereo.
Yeah, unfortunately. Yeah. But yeah. So like you see, you can get very, very complex with this, but don't let that intimidate you, because it's actually really, really fun to just use with play around with 1 or 2 generators and a few effects. And once you get comfortable with it, you start sort of in your mind chunking these effect chains together, and you start realizing what goes well together and how you want to work with it. And there are as many ways to work with it as there are people on the planet, I think, because people make very personal sounds.
Yeah, and I kind of like that it's one of the most capable synthesizers on the market, but it's also can be one of the simplest if you just want one oscillator and a delay.
Yeah,
right.
That's all you see on the screen. You don't see the filter that you have bypassed and the distortion that you have bypassed and whatever.
Yeah,
just add only the parts you need, and then
that's great. We have a bunch of questions stacking up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw the questions, and if we've got a little time, we might come back and have you show a little bit more. But let's go ahead and open up to the first question.
Sure. James Foslin in Minneapolis, Minnesota wants to know, where do I best learn granular synth techniques?
YouTube. Absolutely.
You can start on our YouTube channel if you're going to use Phaseplants.
Mm-hmm.
We have our demo guy George going through how the granular generator works in quite some detail, and then we tend to collect other tutorials that other YouTubers make as well on our YouTube channel.
We make playlists, so you can find other people's content on our page.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael writes in, do you know of any major artists using Phaseplant on stage?
For live performance, I mean, so here's the thing. When we started creating our ecosystem of plugins, we didn't have a specific genre in mind. We thought that if we are, proudly digital, we don't enforce any kind of character on the sound on anyone. That should make everybody like us, right? Turns out classic rock and stuff, they really love that character in their sound. So what happened is that we quickly turned into an audience of mostly EDM and bass music and dubstep and stuff, where people are really, really interested in digital artifacts and really mathematically clean processing. And for a long time, that was our major market. And they tend not to play their instruments live on stage. They, pre-program songs, and then they fiddle with performance-related stuff, like, I don't know, tweaking things on stage rather than performing much. So honestly, I don't know off the top of my head a major artist that performs live with Phaseplant, but it is absolutely possible. And if you're looking to try that, I would really recommend you the new controller from Expressive E. Have you heard about the Osmos?
Haven't.
It's a keyboard controller. It's actually a synth as well, but it works as a controller for Phaseplant. So it's it looks like a piano, but you can do some extended movements on it. Like you can bend the notes a little bit, and you can do various things like that. That works extremely well together with Phaseplant. And I really think that we will be seeing major name artists using Phaseplant in conjunction with this very, very cool new controller that came out. What is it? Like 6 months ago or something. Yeah. Because it is extremely impressive when you hear someone who's a good keyboardist playing Phaseplant on that thing.
And in the same way that you can connect these to each other, are you able to connect external MIDI to the
Yes.
an OSC to
OSC? What's that?
Open Sound Control?
Oh, right. MIDI.
MIDI, yes.
For sure. And then the new extended MIDI thing that is called MPE, that is per note expression, which I mentioned.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
For Phaseplant, it runs inside the DAW always.
Right.
There's no standalone version of it. So whatever MIDI the DAW sends it will just play. So.
That's great, and it can be connected. Is it? Do you add it like a MIDI, like a generator, like something in here, and then attach it to things? Is that how you get the MIDI controls?
You basically just, since it is DAW plugin and it's a synthesizer, the DAW you will just
pass it,
hook it up to whatever you're playing automatically.
That's great.
Mostly just work out of the box.
Yeah, for the sort of new thing is, like I mentioned a few times already, the MPE, which is where you can have more expression per note than on a regular MIDI keyboard. Yeah. So for instance, if you played a regular MIDI keyboard before, if you hit a chord and you then use the pitch bend with your left hand, you're going to bend that entire chord, which might not sound great and might not be the thing you want to do. But these newer controllers can do those types of expressions for each note. That can be a little tricky to set up because most DAWs they haven't conformed on a like protocol on how to set that up. So it can take a little bit of time to figure it out depending on your DAW. But as soon as you have your DAW set up, Phaseplant will work out of the box with it. That's
really cool. Next question.
James Foslin in Minneapolis, Minnesota writes in, have you thought about creating a Stream Deck Plus plugin to use encoder dials to control Phaseplant controls?
Are you familiar with the Stream Deck?
No.
Yeah, I am. No, we haven't. About, but I know. No, we haven't is the short answer, but maybe we should. And I would have to spend some time investigating that, because if there's a good communications protocol that the Steam Deck uses that we could implement, then I could absolutely see that as a really great tool for the, I guess, audio and visual industry as well.
A lot of us have a lot of them.
There may also be some thing where the DAW could act as an intermediary, and all these macro knobs here at the top of the screen are visible to the DAW, so they could be tweaked from the DAW.
Right. So if your Stream Deck can control your DAW in any way, then it's probably already possible to set it up.
Yes, exactly.
That's great. Next question.
Paul Walhoofs in Austin, Texas writes in, what are the user requirements for Phaseplant? What skills and abilities make them most suited to get the most out of Phaseplant?
Right. So the user requirements would probably just be an interest in building your own sound, because a lot of people will be very content playing presets. And Phaseplant provides a lot of presets, but so do many other synthesizers. So if you're looking to get Phaseplant, I would say an interest in learning sort of a little bit of the ins and outs of synthesis would be ideal. If you're not looking to understand how sound is constructed, but rather just play it, Phaseplant of course provides a lot of content for you, but the sort of the nitty gritty and the cool thing about it is that you can tweak and create with it. So an interest in it is absolutely a good thing to have. That being said, it's also, I would argue that it is easier to understand than many of our competitors. So playing with trial and error is also much faster with all the drag and drop and like easy copying of modules and stuff. So I think it's actually a pretty good learning tool if you're trying to get into it. We see that as well with many schools being very interested, like audio schools being very interested in having our plugins in the classrooms, especially since all of these little audio effects, the effects that we put into these lanes are they're sort of so limited in their what they do. They do exactly one thing, what they're called, and they do that well, which is perfect for learning, the basis of sound design. Whereas many other plugin companies will create a black box effect that does a bunch of everything, and you don't really know. There's knobs on it that says, how much coolness do you want? And that's not a great learning tool. If you understand that how to use a gate specifically, and then you learn to use a reverb correctly, then you can make a gated reverb just by combining those two effects. And that's a much better learning experience than going for a tool that was specifically made for that very narrow niche. So yeah, I think it's both a good learning opportunity and also a great way of exploring the world of sound design if you're interested.
Yeah, it seems like you could build a whole course on just sitting on top of this, where you just go through different things, and this is exactly how this works, and this is how. Are there entire courses built around it?
Yeah, yes, there are, and there are some of our advocates out there that we don't specifically work together with, but they offer sound design courses through various platforms on YouTube and other places where you can go there, like take their master class, or you can find various tutors to help you for a fee, or you can just watch a lot of YouTube and do trial and error and learn for yourself. Yeah.
What do you think is your largest industry right now?
I think it's still actually the sort of technologic dance music, if you will, like drum and bass, dubstep and stuff. But close second would be probably video game sound design.
Yeah.
So we hear a lot of little tiny, funny stories lately. So for instance, there was an interview with one of the sound designers who worked on, this is actually a movie, but it's about a video game, about the Super Mario movie the other day. There was an interview where one of the sound designers specifically mentioned Kilohearts, one of our effects, and said that it was very, very useful for making the sound where Mario hits the big mushrooms and bounces off them. And so, little snippets of trivia like that are always fun to hear.
One early job for me was actually doing sound design for a game, and so one of the things I thought of really quickly when I saw that helicopter, and then I started playing with it, was specifically like I could see myself just sitting in here and just building a lot of the effects that I would have done with. I did this 30 years ago, so it was a very arduous process. But this seems like it'd be a great place to just kind of build little components.
Yep.
Yeah, it's actually how we got into audio programming, was that we worked on video games earlier. And then when we started this company, we got a contract to make an audio processing tool for another video games company.
Right.
And that sort of started us into this audio processing quest.
Yeah, I guess. Also, for this, the greater industry of making plugins for your DAW is a very diverse business. There is a lot of free options for every paid plugin. There is 3 free options,
Right.
and a lot of people that do this come from another angle compared to us. So a lot of people are musicians first and foremost, and they lack a specific tool in their arsenal. Right. So they think, well, I guess I'll just have to create it myself. I'll learn to program and I'll do something. Okay. And they start and they make a product and they launch it and they realize they can't charge very much for it because it's full of bugs and the UI is terrible and they get into a lot of problems like that. So that sort of swamped the market.
Right.
So we come from the other end. The 3 of us that started the company are definitely application developers by heart, and we sort of stumbled into audio almost by mistake. And I think that it gives us an edge in that we can make bug-free and very complex, usable, but still usable software. Right. And also, honestly, there's a little bit of an edge in not having the history of music production. Let me explain that a little bit more. We're not sort of hindered by having preconceived ideas of how a compressor should work based on 80 years of hardware compressors conforming to the same standards, and we don't use the same interface. We use a screen. We don't use physical knobs, and there's so much that is different between hardware and software that we see some of our competitors just trying to constantly imitate popular hardware, and some of them do an awesome job of it, but that's not really where we want to go. We want to utilize the computer and the computer screen as best we can. So that's why you can see a lot of more interaction on your screen in our plugins than in many others. You can see how the waveform deforms from FM synthesis. That's very difficult to visualize on an analog synthesizer, for instance.
Now, as app developers, why did you choose to do a plugin as opposed to building a standalone application that can just run on its own?
Sorry. Well, I guess it's just the easiest way to get something that makes noise on your computer is to do it as a plugin, because like the DAW does a lot of heavy lifting just to get that audio engine running and coordinating all the tracks. So actually, like making a plugin is a kind of low barrier to entry way to get something up and running.
Do you have anything else you'd like to show us?
We can just mention maybe some of the other parts of the ecosystem other than Phaseplant.
Yeah.
If you want to.
So we got first, we can say that all these tiny little effects, you can place them in your DAW directly. You don't have to use them inside Phaseplant. They are plugins in their own right. And 2 of them are a little bit larger, multipass and snap heap. And you can also use them in Phaseplant, but typically I think you'd use them on a track in your DAW.
Yeah, you can think of these as multi-effects. So they look similar to Phaseplant, but they don't have that sound generation section to them. They need input audio. So this is, I don't know, maybe you used a multi-effect for your guitar at some point. This is similar. You sort of build your effect chain using the building blocks that were already available. This one in particular is a band splitter. So you split your incoming signal into up to 5 bands, and then you can apply any effect to certain parts of your sound. So if you want reverb on your high end and you want distortion on your low end, that's how you do that within Kilohearts.
Right. That's
really
cool.
So if you want to build your multi-band compressor, for example, you can do that in multibands.
Yeah.
And Snap Hip is a little bit boiled down version of that, where you have just stack as many effects you like.
Yeah, this is very similar to a pedal board for a guitarist.
What you can do is click that button, and that makes those two lanes in parallel. So you can do parallel processing. So if you want bit crush on here and distortion on there, and then they will be mixed together
before going on to the next lane to the right.
The sound.
And then that the mix dial at the bottom just decides how much there those either that individual effect or the overall lane is
so it's for the overall lane. So if you go all the way to the left, these effects no longer do anything.
Right.
You just get the dry sound, and then all the way to the right.
And you could theoretically then, I mean, not theoretically, but you could affect that mix by something else in the chain. So that can be you can route to that mix.
Drop a audio follower in here and have the volume control the mix or something like that.
Yeah. It's really cool.
So in all, it's a little bit like building with Legos. I often think of it. You kind of use the pieces as building blocks to get to where you need to go.
Yeah,
absolutely.
We also have two EQs, which are kind of larger plugins, so they open up in their own window when you run in Phaseplant. So this is Slice EQ, which is a parametric EQ. And actually you can, if I put an LFO here, I can actually modulate those filters.
So you can, So you can, and you could basically expand and contract those equalization, based on some other input.
Yeah,
right. Really
so that's a way to sort of, you can build your own filters basically if you want to emulate a filter that has a certain character that's like more complex than just a low pass filter or high pass filter.
Yeah,
you can sort of build that as an EQ curve and then modulate the cutoff
and attenuate it with any other output from any other piece of the module. That's really great. We got a couple more questions coming in. Let's go to the next question.
Douglas Carmichael writes in, how do you use the sideband lane? Can you use it for side chaining?
The sideband is something I mentioned earlier, that you can have several groups here in the generator section, and each group, rather each output module here, can send to a different lane. But they can also send to something called the sideband,
which is non-audible.
Yes, so this, you can't hear this, but in these effect units over here, you can pick that up. So if you add, say, a compressor, you can have the compressor as a sidechain input, and you can pick the sideband input as the sidechain input for the compressor. So that's one way you can use it. There's also the ring mod, for example, which also has that kind of input. So the ring mod multiplies two signals together. And the ring mod effect, it has its own oscillator inside it, but you can also say, don't use the internal oscillator, use the sideband instead as the input.
Right. And going back to the original question, I think there was a side question that can you use that to sidechain stuff? Yes and no, because most DAWs will have a way for you to use the audio from one track to affect something on another track. Commonly effects like the compressor, which is the very most common way of thinking of sidechaining. Our little compressor unit is available as standalone, like we mentioned before. You don't have to use it inside Phaseplant. So if you want to do a classic sidechain setup in your DAW, you just add the compressor to your track, make sure that you are in your DAW sending the correct information to that track where the compressor is on, and in Ableton, it looks like this. In other DAWs, it might look different. One thing about this is that we would love to have audio input into Phaseplant. So DAWs classically distinguish between instruments and effects. And some of them allow audio input into instruments, others don't. So in some DAWs, you can't technically get the audio from one track to go into Phaseplant on another track. So that's why it's not really possible at the moment to use the sidechaining feature from another track inside Phaseplant. However, Kilohearts have been around for a while by now, and our influence on the DAW makers is growing. So we are pushing them into enabling these kinds of features. So it would be possible.
And we have tried it out, and it does work in some DAWs.
Yeah.
So it might be that we add that feature to Phaseplant.
Mm-hmm. And if you have two tracks with two different Phaseplant instances, and doing two different things in those tracks, can you? I know this will probably not work, but can you connect the output into the input of another? The attenuate things between the two.
That's what we were hoping would work, but in some DAWs it would work, in some it wouldn't.
So that's not I'm not talking about the sound. I'm talking about the actual settings. So
like modulation,
like the modulation.
No, they can't talk to each other that way.
No,
unfortunately.
That'd be mind blowing.
However, you can set up many of the modulation sources can be tempo synced or like song position synced, and you can set up identical modulators in both of the instances to get.
Oh, that would work. Yeah, no, absolutely, that makes sense. Next question.
James Foslin in Minneapolis, Minnesota writes in, if you had a live stream when introducing your granular synth update in the studio behind you, have you thought about having regular monthly streams to connect with your users?
Yes,
we have considered that. Yes,
and I don't think it's going to be monthly, but it's going to be much more frequent than we have in the past. Yes,
that's great. Next question.
Paul Walhus in Austin, Texas writes in, is Phaseplant cross-platform, Mac, M1, Windows, Android, iOS, Linux, etc.?
It's Windows and Mac, and on Mac we support both Intel and M1 natively.
That's great.
But
have you seen
Android,
any
no iOS,
specifically
no Linux?
Specifically with the shift from Intel to M1, we're tracking that. Did you see much of a performance shift with your software with going to the M1 or going to the M6?
Before we ported it to run natively on M1, it already ran really well on those processors through Rosetta.
Mm-hmm.
Like that piece of software that emulates an Intel on an M1 is quite impressive. But still, we ported it so it runs natively on M1. Got a small performance boost out of that as well. So,
next question.
Douglas Carmichael writes in, can the pitch tracker send out MIDI? What would you recommend to convert audio to MIDI in real time?
I can't say I can recommend anything because I don't know enough. But our pitch tracker cannot output MIDI, unfortunately. It outputs these modulation signals, so you can route it to anything inside Phaseplant or inside Multipass, but you can't send it out as MIDI, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Next question.
Todd Reynolds writes in, can you play us your absolute favorite presets that have been created for Phaseplant?
Oh, here we go.
Oh, yeah. Well, we play the Flutophone. That's, I think, my all-time favorite. And that's been in the synthesizer since day one.
Yeah, actually.
Yeah. What else?
Is that just a beta tester that just put it together and sent it back to you going, hey, this is what I did?
No, actually, we commissioned a few people for the factory content that we wanted to have included. And Rob Swire is one of the more famous ones, actually. Yeah.
But what we have? We have, I quite like this one because I made it myself.
The screen sharing is
killing the computers.
Yeah,
can't play
that's very unfortunate. We should have gotten a better computer for this demo. But
this is a good intro to your live stream.
There's a, the upside to that is that there's a 10-day absolutely free trial with no credit card needed or anything if you want to try it out for yourself.
And what's the cost of Phaseplant?
Phaseplant is $199, and that includes the synth and most of the effects. I'm gonna add that little reminder in there that anything in this column, the premium effects and the effects host, these ones cost a little extra. But there's a bundled price as well if you want to get all of it. And then there's a very affordable sort of rent-to-own option where you immediately get access to everything, including all of the, very many content banks that are
so there's so that you can buy it outright, or you can subscribe. And what's the subscription cost?
So the subscription cost is $9.99 a month. Mm-hmm. And then for every 12 months you subscribe, you actually get $100 sort of store credit voucher back. So that means after a couple of years, you'll be able to buy all of the parts of the system that you're using or that you want. So it's sort of a payment plan.
It's really interesting. I've not seen anybody do that before. So you can.
We launched it together with Phaseplant in 2019, and I'm sure you're aware that in the audio industry, a lot of companies have tried and sort of
failed.
Had some failures with subscription plans. So the fact that I can count the number of complaints we've had with our subscription plan on one hand, and that's not a lie, makes me very happy. Yeah.
It's really, it definitely sees, you can see how it makes it nice and easy to get into it, but you're still building up a credit towards you could just own it, down the road.
We don't try to force people into the subscription either. If they just want to get the regular old perpetual license, that's totally fine. Mm-hmm. And we see about 50-50 split, I think, between people who choose the subscription or the...
Yeah, so I wouldn't say that one option is better than the other, and that's not the intention. The intention is that we want our software in the hands of as many people as possible, and we quickly realized that a lot of our audience is very young, ages 15 and up, and they don't have $399 to spend on a full bundle of software.
Yeah,
or they have to ask their mom
And for the $10 a month,
understand.
And for the $10 a month, they get everything, right? That's all the things that you have there.
Mm-hmm. All the things and all the content banks and stuff.
That's fantastic. Next question.
Yeah, I love seeing innovation when it comes to that kind of setup. Paul Walhouse writes in, what have the reviews and feedback been from users? What do you like most, and what do they want to see improved?
Right.
Everyone wants a multi-sampler, which is a feature we do not have. We have a sampler. You can load one sample into it. And of course, you can have several samplers and stack them. But we can't do that thing where you assign a single sample to each key on the keyboard and stuff like that.
That's a very common feature request.
Yeah.
There are a lot of feature requests. We have a very active Discord community.
I think you get into, there's a kind of the deep water here is that you have tinkerers working. I mean, this app leads to tinkerers, people who want to tinker with everything, and that's going to lead to the kind of person that's going to think of, I immediately thought, I want to tie this to another track, and I want to tie this over here, and so that's just the way that the mind works that would use this, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we because of the feeling that you get when you use it, that I can add just another module, makes you immediately think that, I can invent one of these modules. There's this thing that they never thought of. So yeah, like you say, it leads your imagination, you can go wild. We also have a very active Discord community. If you're familiar with Discord, we have many thousands of users there, and we have a lot of discussion every day, which is it's great, and it's a perfect way for us to interact with our customers. We spend a bit of time there every day, and the feature request channel on that Discord is very long. I don't think anyone could read it all, even if they wanted to.
Yeah.
That's great.
We also have the thing whenever we put limits on anything, like how slow an LFO can be or something, people always complain.
They're like, why can't you just
like between 0 and infinity or something?
Wait, one more question.
Douglas Carmichael writes in, would you ever think of making a dedicated hardware product?
Probably not, because we're not very good at it.
It's hard. It's hard.
Yes. Yeah. We love software. That's where we're comfortable.
Yeah, and we also love working with people who make great hardware. Like I already mentioned the Osmos, but I mean, there are great controllers available for software.
What do you think are the best controllers for what you're doing?
Well, absolutely that one. But other than that, there's something really cool called the Linstrument by Roger Lynn.
The Linstrument ties into this?
Yeah,
absolutely. It works perfectly with Phaseplant. Yeah,
it's my daily driver actually while I'm developing and so I have it on my desk at all times. It works really well with the pitch bend and the pressure sensitivity.
Oh,
that's very cool. So those would be my top 2 picks, I think.
Yeah,
that's great. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you coming to join us.
It's fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Really excited about the software. I think that, usually what happens is that we do a second hour like this, and then we're going to try to probably pull you back in to do a lab with us at some point. A bunch of people will start to play with it, and we'll see if we can all play with it together. I think that, again, a bunch of us, I'm sure, will be looking at the Discord, your Discord, to add to the Discord that we already have here. So we're very, really, really excited. So really, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks to the panelists, for being here and answering all the questions in the first hour. Can't do it without you. Thanks to the producers who asked all the questions, and that was a lot of great questions. Drove our conversation forward. And thanks to the incredible crew. There's a small village that lights up every day to run this show. So all the edits, the development, the processing, everything all gets done. There's a development team. There's management teams. There are live teams, and all of them are necessary to get this off every day, 7 days a week. So we really appreciate the work that you do. We traveled 75,000 miles today in our questions, 121,000 kilometers, and 597 bananas for scale. All right, let's go ahead and jump into After Hours. Thanks, guys.
Great job, guys.
Yeah, that was really good.
Nicely done. So Douglas Carmichael, Kill the Noise is a pretty big deal.
I try not to open it up because just hours disappear every time. It's like a teleporter.
It's so pretty. So pretty.
When I opened it up, I think I lost an entire Saturday. It was just like I opened it up right after office hours, and then it was like dinner time, and I was like, "What happened? What happened?"
It's like, what does an oscilloscope look like when it's the prettiest thing ever?